No, we are on.
We are recording. All right. So I'm sure more people are going to show up, but welcome everybody. It's Tuesday, November 24th, 2020. This is our regular school board workshop, but we are using it as a building committee meeting this evening. We have decided to, as best we can, take workshops and sort of bring in our strategic goals and those topics and weave them in. And so this is one of our goals, to focus on buildings and the building committee. And so it seems like a perfect opportunity. So welcome everyone. Donna, do you want to begin with the charge?
Sure. The building committee charge is to review the needs of the assessment report, determine priorities, determine the size and scope of a future building project and bond, and then make a recommendation to the school board.
Okay, and we had talked about wanting to try to have that be hopefully before the end of 2020. That would be a goal, to be able to have a recommendation for the school board and get this ball rolling a little bit more, if possible. I just want to welcome everybody once again, and people keep filing in, which is great. And before we get started with Matt, who is Matt here? Do I see him?
I don't see him.
I don't see him on yet.
Oh, there he is.
Yep,
There he is.
up here
There he
in the
is.
top
Hi,
left
Matt.
corner next to Donna.
I see you now. Yeah.
Thanks on my screen. How are you?
I'm great. Welcome so much. I just wanted to sort of take a moment and address, we've had further conversation about communication and sort of the functioning and sharing of information in this committee. And one of the things that I've done, so I just wanted to create some clarity here right now for the public and for those members on the committee, that we have created a file. If you go into the school board website, I believe, and you can help me out, anybody from Jen to Donna, there's a few, like budget is one of the top highlighted things, but it is one of the major highlighted, maybe coronavirus is another one. So those are the three. And if you click right on the building committee, it comes up, there's a folder on the side where there's information in there. And so if you have information, if you have an article that you've seen that you want to share with the committee, we're doing it that way, as opposed to sending it to Donna or myself to share with everybody, because that way it's more transparent. The whole, not just the committee, but anybody in the town can access that information. That information in that area is not meant for that area. I'm sorry, people are texting me saying they're having a hard time getting in, so I'm a little distracted. But that area is not meant to be opinions and conversations. It is just the links and the facts. The conversations need to take place right here within the committee and within the committee time. Also, it is not recommended reading. So any information that goes in there is really beneficial, and we're happy to add it. But at the same time, it is not something that is expected that all members of the committee will necessarily go to and read through all the material. So it's helpful and appreciated. And that is the way we're going to try to communicate, do most of the communicating of opinions and thoughts and discussion right here together in the form of Zoom, which is so lovely, and leave the emails and the folder for passing along links. So I just wanted to make that a little bit clear. Are there any questions or any further clarification?
Heather, just to clarify, I'm on other committees as well. That's the way most of these town committees work, correct?
I don't know. I'm hoping so. I believe, Terry, that you know, in the spirit of transparency, I think that is the best and easiest way to do it. And I think you know, we just really believe this is a large committee, that we want the conversations to happen here, where we know everybody's participating. So
I can
thanks,
hop in
Karen.
and say, Heather, as you know, that's the way the school board works. No conversation over email. This is done in the public. Conversation and opinions are shared at the meetings.
Yep. That's great. You're right. Sorry, I'm distracted. People keep texting me. I have to turn my phone saying they can't get in a meeting. Yes, that is how we tend to do it in the school board. So thank you, Elizabeth, for that clarification. So moving on to item 2, we have Matt is here with the bonding capacity updates. And go ahead, Matt.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see everybody this evening, and happy Thanksgiving to you all early. Hopefully it'll be a happy one for all of us and a safe one. So when we last got together, at least the last time we discussed this subject matter in, I believe it was November of last year. It feels like a decade ago at this point, but we did explore a lot of the different financing questions relating to, or financing options relating to this project. And at the time, what I did was I had provided a little pro forma, for lack of a better term, that kind of gave a breakdown and talked about what the statutory limit is for financing for municipalities or for towns, as well as what there is for limits relating to schools. And this is hot off the conversation I'd had with Joe Quintaro of Moores and Cabot, who does a lot of our bond work for the town over the years, and they are a top-notch firm. Speaking with Joe, and at the time we were exploring different bonding options, Cape Elizabeth currently has what they call AAA bond rating through Standards & Poor, and then a double A1 rating from Moody's, and I think actually we're at AAA now with Moody's since that time. So we are considered what is a prime investment grade, which is the best possible rating that we can possibly have. As you go down the gradings from high grade to upper medium grade to lower medium grade, every time you step down to a lower grade, you can add 10 to 15 basis points, or so say, like if you had an interest rate at a prime rating of 2%, if you went to like a high grade, you'd be paying 2.1, 2.15% interest. And then the next tranche down, you go to 2.25 to 2.4. And then, for example, then you go for a lower grade, 2.5 to 2.9. So almost a point swing in between from the different levels of bond ratings. And then looking at the statute and what the state has for requirements, or at least legally has for requirements, that at least as far as a ceiling would go, for a town, the legal limit for all types of debt, or the debt limit that you can have, is 15% of the town's last full state valuation. And as of this past spring, Cape Elizabeth had a equalized state valuation of $2.275 billion, and so that would put us at if you blew that all out, it would be a pretty substantial amount of debt that one can undertake, but that would also be catastrophic to our bond rating, as well as being able to do anything else. But looking at if you look at the total statutory debt limit for the town of all forms at 15%, our upper limit is roughly 341 million in debt that the town could take under. Now, of that 15%, there's specific language relating to the school debt limit. And of that 15%, a town could have up to 10% of its last full state valuation. So that would be about 227 million is the upper limit of all debt, at least the statutory upper limit. So that kind of gives you that as an idea. Now, currently the school debt service is $4.6 million. And the town overall has an additional, let's see, well, the town and the sewer district has debt of basically 11.1 million. So the total is 15.7 million roughly. Now, speaking with Joe, they talk about, or my conversation with him was, what does the market tend to find acceptable as far as debt limits and what a town may have? And what they end up finding is that they look at it from a couple different avenues. And one is per capita debt, which is one way. So you look at that based on your population. And there's different ranges that you have on there. Roughly an acceptable max range is roughly $3,000 to $4,000 per capita. What we're looking at now under our current debt circumstances is $1,745 is what we're looking at now. And then the other way that they also look at it is an estimated acceptable max amount of debt service in relationship to the state value. And that would be roughly 2 to 3%. So that's roughly about $5,000 to $6,000 per capita is what they've looked at. Now, looking at that from another angle, if I can keep on traveling here, there's a couple of different ways to look at this as well. And I don't know if I have the ability to share my screen. I could show you what I'm referring to here, which I think the board and the participants may find interesting. So, Donna, I don't know if you can control that.
You can. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but as a panelist, you can share your screen.
I think, Jen, I think you might need to allow me to, because it says that host disabled participant screen sharing.
Let's see.
So if you want to pass it over to me, then I'll pass it back to you if that would work.
I'm just making you a co-host. Go ahead, Matthew.
Oh, you're awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I know I'm really glad I'm doing showing you all this before Thanksgiving dinner. So I know that I have your full attention. So this can get a bit dry, but I hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed putting it together. Let's see. So now looking at this spreadsheet, if you look down the left-hand side of the column, you'll see that there are expenditures, revenue, net to taxes, and then the tax rates. This is the current fiscal year's budget numbers that we're using. So this is from the most recent adopted budget. So that kind of gives you an idea about this is our baseline. Now across the top margin, you'll see that there's average home value, and then what the current average tax amount is for that average home. And then there's also median home value. So, and then the median tax amount. And then of course, little old assessing 101, your median is, there are 50% higher and 50% lower than the median assessed value there. So that is right dead smack in the middle for all single family residences, inclusive of condominiums. Now, so that kind of gives you an idea about what their current tax burden is here in fiscal year 21. And then as I roll down, if you look to the right of where the net to taxes is, you see debt amount, service, tax rate impact, median home, and average home. This will kind of give you a perspective as to if, as the discussion goes forward relating to financing or debt level that the project may, that you may be discussing. So for instance, if you look at $40 million on for debt amount for a project of that size, the debt service on that for a 30-year bond at, I think I might have put that at 2.5% or 2%. Let's see, 2.5%, and that's conservative. At least it is this year. We did do some funding this past summer and got 1.297 for a 5-year bond for the town, but that was for lease purchase. So the rates may be different by the time this may go to that point. So, but I used 2.5 there. So that's the debt service for 30 years. So you'd be paying 1.8 million, almost 1.9 for 30 years. The tax rate impact would be if all things stayed the same, which the one constant in life is change. But if all things stayed the same within the budgetary parameters, the tax rate impact year one would be $2.34 on the tax rate, $771 increase in taxes on the median home, at least if that stayed at $329.5, and just over $1,000 on the average home. And then you can see there, it advances further and further down through the screen where you have at 50 million, it's adds roughly $260 to the tax rate, or about $860 or $1,100, and so on and so forth. With the, for purposes of this situation, I went between 40 and 80. I can obviously go higher, or I can go lower, depending upon the math that you need to have done. But hopefully that provides at least somewhat of a feel for at least what the numbers look like. And then, of course, if you do change, there are other constants that you could change within that. If you decided to go less, go for a shorter term, say 20 years. The maximum limit you can go to is 30 years by law as well. So, you look at some other communities that have done that. I think most of them have, if they've gone for larger numbers, they've probably gone for larger terms or longer terms as well to try to minimize the impact. Because obviously, if you shorten the term, you have to increase the amount of your debt. I hope that's somewhat helpful. If you'd like, I can bail out of the screen share and be open to any questions if that would be helpful, Madam Chair.
Yes.
And by the way, I do know that's a lot to take in on a Tuesday night at 6:30. So I am always open for questions, and I'll provide this over to Donna and Jen so they can have it posted for the committee as well to take a look at.
Are there any questions? Marianne, you're muted. You need to unmute, please.
Thank you. Sorry. Matt, can you put that screen share back up again? I just want to make sure I understand. Is that possible?
I think so. Just take me just a moment. Let's see here. There we go. Get that, Marianne?
Thank you. Yeah.
You're
So
welcome.
just so I understand, and we'll use the 40 million debt amount, your lowest debt amount. So on the median home right now, the taxes are 8,600.
On an average, the median is roughly
Oh, I'm
65.
sorry. I'm
Yep.
sorry. On the average home, the taxes are 8,600. And you would add $1,011
Yes, so
to-
that would be,
to 40
Yeah.
million. So that's about a 12% tax increase.
that's about right. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and that's just to carry the debt. That would not include the normal tax increase that we see every year to operate the schools in the town.
You are correct. Yes, that would be, as I said, if you were looking at that and having all things stay basically the same. So you kind of, that would be exclusive of any other changes.
And how much debt are we retiring? Do you have a schedule of that?
I do.
Matt?
I have it hard copy in front of me here, but over the course of the next few years, we will be retiring some debt as we go along. The most short-term one will be a sewer fund debt that we have. And then next to that, there are, and that's probably the largest nut of it all. That's about $200,000 per year, which will come off in 6 years.
200,000 of debt service.
Yes, and then say, for instance, next year we'll drop about $300,000 in debt service out of there because we have about 200 coming off on the or total town, and then we also have let's see, some school debt that'll also be retiring over the term of that year. So there are other variables that do get reduced over time that will offset that. Then, as you said as well, there are other items that also increase. So this is just looking at it under current terms, a snapshot for today.
Okay, thanks. You've answered my
welcome.
question.
there anyone else? Okay. Andy,
And-
was that? Go ahead, Matt. And then Andy.
again, like I said, this is a lot to take in, so you'll get a long holiday weekend. Don't feel shy about reaching out to me after you've had some time to digest it more as well.
Great.
So Matt, you have about 15 million in debt right now, which you just said is going to come off. I think Marianne asked a good question. Some of that's going to come off. But would seem reasonable to try and understand what that number might look like, say 5-10 years out, and also try and model what new stuff is going to come on, because the town always has new things coming on, I'm sure, around roads and things like that. So I mean, this is going to be, it'll help to reduce it, but it may reach a level where it's not going to get on too much. I mean, what's the history of the town? I mean, does it ever work around $5-7 million?
Looking like over the next 5 years, you're probably looking at roughly, like by 2025, the total school is going to go down, total P&I from like 880 down to 420. So you're dropping about 460 off over the next 5 years there for debt service. And then on the town side, by 25, we're looking at about 700,000 that's going to be coming off total. So over the next, and then you've got the sewer fund that also drops off. Now, at the same time, there are other items that might come on that are unanticipated or anticipated. And, we may have a sewer project that needs to come on in the future. A lot of that's offset by sewer rates and the fees that are paid to substantiate, to support that. And then the other side would also be looking at, town capital projects that may require bonding as well. The one that comes most quickly to mind would be Shore Road improvements that are going to have to take place, but they are, in comparison to a school project, obviously very, very conservative. They're low numbers in comparison to that, but there will be items that do come on that we have to, or that we would consider that because it is cost effective. So, there are multiple variables in play that do happen to come across, but you can look at that and a more substantial, I think, analysis would be to expand this fully and look at that over the next, like say, a 20-year period of time, or at least maybe the next decade might even be sharper, at least for discussions here, that you could retire and then look at anticipated retirement of debt, and then anticipate new debt to be added, and try to forecast that all the way out.
The other thing I think is important to understand is that, 40 million is on the low side of the financing. These jobs that we've been talking about as a committee are up around $60-80 million, but at the same time, those go out in tranches, right? It's not going to be a big bite day one, year one. I would assume over, whatever, depending on what option, the committee decides to try and advance, you're going in with, it's smaller bites than say 60-80 million all at once, correct?
That's another big element of the discussion. I agree with you, Andy. If you looked at that and you said, okay, let's phase this, you could look at that and say, okay, we know year 1 to 3, we know it's going to be 15 million. Year 3 to 5, it's going to be X. Year 5 to 7, it's going to be Y. And then you could put that in there. The challenge at that point would just be, what are your interest, what's your
Right.
cost to borrow going to be? So
Right.
if you looked at it in this, right now, if you could take a big bite at it and know that you could get it in a 1.5. The
Your
numbers could be
model
pretty
showed
good.
2.5% right there. Was that 2.5%?
I was forecasting at 2.5%, but like I said, we just went out at 1 point, basically 1.3 this past summer for 5 years. That was $1 million, $1.5 million roughly. And then, but I think there's, it'd be worth, sometimes it's worth taking that and holding that and using that as you do, and then you could possibly, take other approaches with that funding. But But 5 years from now, we could be back 4.5%, 5%. So your money would be more expensive then, but at the same time, you could do it for a shorter period of time. So, there's all those elements in play. If you only need, if your first part, you're going to look at it and you had a lower number and you were doing that for a longer term, and then you had a smaller number, but for a shorter term, but at a higher interest rate. So there's a lot of, like I say, there are a lot of parts to that picture.
Thank you, Matt. That's all I have, Heather. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Matt, I have a question. So it looks like we have 4.6% or so of the total amount that we can borrow as a town. And what's the history of that? Do we normally sit around 5% borrowed against how much we can, keep as a town? And do you know what other towns are sitting at? And what I'm trying to get at is understanding, like, are we borrowing so little that it's at the detriment of the community?
Sorry, Nicole, I didn't realize I was muted. Right now, we're at about 0.69% of our state valuation. So, less than 0.75%. I think it depends upon your perspective, I guess. And I know that's the total bureaucratic way of answering the question.
Yeah,
but,
there's opportunity cost to everything. Yeah.
Yeah, so it ends up providing, on the one side, the town has been very, very strategic in taking on debt. And it also has resulted in an incredibly, an excellent bond rating.
We have the bond rating for when we do need to borrow. Yep.
Yeah, so that's helped us out quite a bit. So it's been very, very, very consistent, but very pragmatic in its borrowing as well as targeted. We've been in that range. Part of it is too, with the valuation going to where it's at in modern times, that number should be pretty small. So that's why I think that 2% of equalized value is a pretty substantial number as well. You get a little bit more than that, it starts to be, starts to get up there, but that's, at almost $2.3 billion in valuation, you're looking at a pretty substantial number that you can pull and still not really negatively impact your bond rating. When you start to go really heavier, you start to exceed that, then they start to find that it's a little more risk involved. But I hope that answers your question.
It does. And I'm just wondering what other towns are at for borrowing levels, like similar towns, but we can find that data later too.
Well, if it's any help, I know Yarmouth is probably the one that comes to mind most frequently, and I think they took on about 60 million in debt two, maybe 3 years ago now. Maybe dating myself, but they went from they had a AA1 rating to a AA2 rating, so they brought them down a little bit. So they might have to pay 15 basis points more now than they did probably before that. That's about the closest example I could find.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Marianne. You need to unmute, Marianne.
Sorry, Matt, for comparison's sake, do you know what the valuation is in Yarmouth? The total assessment of the town?
I can
I
get
think
it.
it's
It'll
hard
take me a
to-
second.
It's hard to just compare 60 million in debt without knowing what Yarmouth's total valuation is.
Marianne, if I could have just a moment, and I will get that for you. I was just on there today, so I have it here in my.
Well, I'm impressed.
Some habits die hard.
That's really impressive. I
Let's
think you're
see here.
channeling your predecessor there.
I'm just trying to anticipate questions. They're at 1.863, so they're about 900 million less than, I'm sorry, almost 400 million less than we are. We're at 2.275 and they're 1.863.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Matt while we still have him before moving on? Right. Thank you so much for that, Matt. Really appreciate it.
You're
Thank you for
entirely
being
welcome.
here.
Thank you.
Yeah. We then have Colby and Company. And I think I saw Kalen show up. There he is. Welcome, Kalen. Nice to have you. A report on environmental impact in new construction versus renovation. So we have both Kalen and James here. I'll pass it over to you two. Thank you so much.
James, you want to run that?
Sure, I can start. You can. I'll throw it back over to you, Galen.
All right.
Thank you very much, Heather. And following up on the meeting that we had last month, we were asked to look at just some basic statistics or just information of environmental impact of demolishing an existing building or renovating or doing a frame-off restoration in place. And the memo that we sent over to you folks this week generally describes how it's a standard design practice now, like through any renovation or large scale construction, salvage and recycling of as much of the demolished material is being done currently. There are a lot of things that, if you're demolishing steel, you can reuse that and that can be recycled and sold. You can take crushed slab and concrete that can be crushed as aggregate and potentially sold at other places as well. And looking at the existing building demolition versus a renovation or a frame-off restoration, if you were to do that, you would still be recycling or you wouldn't be recycling, you'd still be throwing out a lot of material like drywall, old ceiling tiles, old ceiling grid, any siding on the building, floor tiles, if there is any say toxic hazardous material that's way deep, that's very deep underneath the tiles and floor of the building that's just been covered over for the last 40 or 50 years or 60 years or so, that would also have to be removed and then hazmated as far as disposal concerned. In one of the notes, when we're considering the environmental impacts of this issue, is the shape of the building. Right now, the lower and middle school is a very inefficient shape as far as trying to get hot water and electrical and air from one side of the building to the other. That's solved partially with separate rooftop units that are spread throughout the building. And you can still, take a frame off restoration, but you still have the inefficiencies of an older slab that may not have a proper R rating or an insulation value. And you're still, as was mentioned previously, I think Kaylin had mentioned it at or one of our previous meetings, you're still attacked from all sides on a renovated building of this particular shape because it's a single floor and you're attacked from the sides, you're attacked from the roof, and you're attacked from the bottom as well. And Kaylin, if you want to.
Yeah, just wanted to sort of reinforce some points is Scott Simons, when they have come on since we started the process and made several presentations to the board about the style of teaching and the shape of the classrooms, and saying that, the ceilings, this would be in the idea that to save the renovation, and you would save the concrete and the steel, but that the shape of the building from an energy standpoint is inefficient. Scott Simons has come on and said, hey, the teaching isn't done well in classrooms of this size and shape. And so when we do construction management right now, we're managing about $200 million worth of construction. Most contractors will try to have so many offsets for their demolition piece that the cost is zero to you, the client, or to us, the client. And in a good market, when steel is up and concrete is up, you can almost do that on those two alone. So as James mentioned, there are portions of any building that will have to go to a landfill or through a trash to energy plant. But a large number of the things that are coming out of this, the plastics, the copper, the steel, the concrete, Even certain linoleum and tile products, there's a market for those out there. And in a good market, the cost of demo can be very, very small. And the reason I'm bringing that up is when you put, there's a lot of buckets to look at. The cost of demolition and construction is one, the bond rating and the interest, whether or not you're renting trailers for this, for this work, and then the long-term energy costs of living in this new school that you're going to create. The demolition piece to us as engineers and architects is a fairly small slice of the pie. Our hope is that it would just be done to the very best that it can be done, meaning we're having the contractor giving us the cradle to grave, meaning they have collected everything, put it in the right dumpsters. We make sure it goes to the right places. The LEED process, for those of you that are familiar with the LEED process, even if you don't do a LEED rated building, those processes are all in place and the contractors know how to do it. And we can still track the cradle to grave, even if you're not going after a LEED building. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there questions? All right. So moving on, we have the impact of COVID-19 on material costs. So it's back to you two.
So what we and other firms are doing at this point is for projects that are slated for multiple years out, we're using a term called the construction escalation, where that's a 3 to 5% increase factor based on when it is constructed. We're trying to capture what this potential estimated bond size would be for what we've detailed in each of the options, what that would potentially be today. And you'll notice that the numbers that we provide have increased by about 5% for each value. One thing that we had mentioned previously is with a project like this or any large scale capital project, you want to pursue it's a schematic design level effort in order to capture what the actual shape of the building is going to be. Because right now what we're basing our numbers on is a general square footage of what each building is now. And going forward with a schematic design level, it brings you to about 15 or 20% of what the actual building is going to be. You go through the programming of all the different folks that are in these buildings, what classrooms that they need, what type of square footage for spaces that they need. Basically adapting what was a standard practice 20 or 30 years ago when these rooms were constructed to what they are today in 2020. So that's why the numbers that we're able to provide you here is just it's a standard construction escalation increase by about 5% for all of our numbers. As we go forward, the numbers, and again, generally typically go up without some sort of vast, immovable marketing influence that comes out of nowhere. And right now, despite the issues with the pandemic that's been affecting our economy in such a drastic way, construction and design in many market sectors are still increasing or continuing on as normal. As far as the federal government still moving forward with many of their projects, some educational institutions are still moving forward with their projects, and they're not stopping.
If I could just close
Please,
on
yes.
that one is it's interesting that I've mentioned a couple times, and it stays true today. Although there's a glimmer of hope out there, I'll get to that in a moment. Is we should be seeing structural steel in place, erected for a building of the size and shape that you should be looking for. That should be $3,500 to $4,000 a ton. Concrete should be $500 to $600 a cubic yard. We're seeing steel at $12,000 a ton. Even in the best high volume steel projects, you're still looking at $8,500 to $9,500 a ton instead of the $3,000 to $3,500 to $4,000. We're seeing concrete at $800, and we've seen slab work, high end slab work at $1,200 a cubic yard instead of the $400 to $600 ish that you should be paying now. It's routinely at $800 a yard, so not quite twice on average. One of the things that we are seeing in the building market is the foot has come off the gas pedal a little bit. I think what we're seeing now is people are racing, people with a lot of cash as they had before pre-COVID are racing to get their projects in with the idea that when the virus is gone away and behind us, they'll be the people with the bright, shiny new building as people want to move to Portland or come back to work or whatever. If the pandemic continues and if there's an adjustment in the economy made, you're likely to see some of those costs come down. The other thing that's playing in our favor to move this out a little bit, even if it's just a year, is that there are more young people going into the trades. And so the lack of manpower is actually getting better annually now. It's slow right now, but it's starting that curve of a lot more people in the community colleges, a lot more welders, a lot more plumbers, tradespeople coming out. So I can't predict the future. I would look to Matt for that. But I think things are at least trending a little bit in our favor rather than not in our favor as they were pre-COVID. Thank you.
Okay. Mary Ann, can you unmute, please?
Sorry. Just to follow up on that then, is it fair to say that option one, we're looking at probably an additional $2 million? Option two, an additional 3.5 to 4 million? And option three, an additional 2.5 million?
Yep, that's
That
right.
is-
That's, if you priced it today, Marianne, you can hear me, right? If you went out today, you would find those costs anywhere from, like James said, about 5% higher. That's right now. We're still seeing those prices. A year from now, if you pull together a design and that kind of thing and go out for a bond, you may see that they've normalized a little bit, and you may get that 5% back. Again, I know it sounds self-serving, but to James's point, to actually get a design on paper, which is the shape of the building, the style of the building, actually studying how much square foot you need, what type of teaching the teachers want to do, and put it on paper to the place where a contractor can truly look at it, and it's not just the dollars per square foot. One last point on the contractors, we are routinely dealing with contractors who do work from anywhere from about 50 million up to hundreds of millions of dollars, are still telling us that they have work through next fall. We have to beg them to bid stuff now, and we're seeing folks that have all of next year basically covered. So when you're trying to shoehorn a project in, you're asking them to ask their workers to work overtime, and that comes at a premium. And sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, that's great. Thank you.
I'll note as well that each of those numbers, again, that's just to increase by 5% from the previous numbers.
Anything else? Okay. And so lastly, the report on the remaining three options, option 1, 2, and 3 from Colby and Company. Is that just going to be a review?
I think that's just I would say that's a general discussion. I think everyone's very familiar with the options. And again, I'll mention really quickly from the very beginning when we submitted this memo to you folks back in January, these are just options, and there can be any direction that these can take. Notice that we're not talking about option 4, which we were talking about over a year ago with regard to the cafetorium and the security upgrades, because at the time that was a very it was a hot button issue that really wanted to have the attention that it needed to have. And going
the
forward,
beginning of the conversation.
Exactly, the very beginning of the conversation. Yeah, and so we're just trying to culminate all the information and requests that we've received from you folks, and Just trying to give you as much information as we can.
Mhm, mhm. So I guess I'll just review quickly and read these options just to refresh our minds, and then maybe we can have some conversations. But option one, it's a phased lower school and middle school building replacement. Um, and the estimate of phase one, I'm not going to read through all the details because this is just a reminder, is 39 to 30 to 43 million dollars. And then the estimated of phase two would be 42 to 46. So that becomes, about $80,000, give or take, with the two phases together. James, I'm counting on you to jump in if I make a mistake here, right?
No,
So
that's that's perfectly right.
Right.
Actually, if you want, I can just give a brief description if that's all right, Heather.
That would be fabulous.
So if we're looking just at option one, it was broken out as far as we'll build redo a portion of the lower middle school first, concurrently with some of the buildings still in operation, and then having a second phase as well a few years later, just to relieve some of that initial upfront bond debt. Option two, which is a lower cost option. Option one is more of the $80 to $90 million at this point with the included construction escalation.
Okay.
Looking at option two is a concurrent lower and middle school replacement completely. There would be as part of the schematic design study, you figure out where the future footprint's going to go. And the plan would take place to build the new building with the lower school being phased out, but with minimal interruption to the current classes. There would be significant interruption with option one because you essentially would have half a building functioning and you'd be moving sort of students back and forth. Option three, the complete frame off restoration and renovation of the existing lower middle schools. That bond size we're projecting that again based on square footage, $55 to $60 million at this point. That would basically go wing by wing, section by section of the lower middle school. You tear it down to the stud. You get rid of everything that's in there, with except for the structural members and anything that can still be salvaged. Obviously, some portions of the roof that had recently been replaced, efforts would be made to maintain that, and any new equipment that be purchased. But you're looking at taking everything down to the stud walls and then rebuilding it from that point. This would require, and which was described in the earlier memo from February, I think it's February 4th actually, you would have to require temporary housing for the students. So you'd have to have temporary either trailers or portables. They would also have to have their own electrical, plumbing, heating, utilities brought to them as well. And then finding a location for those on the Cape Elizabeth site, as well as having a location for all the construction laydown equipment. So when contractors come in, they need to clear a significant area, a field, small parking lot, just to put down their equipment as they go. So that is what option three would look like.
Can you remind us of the cost of the portables?
What we took was when we spoke to one of our portable vendors, without having a detailed drawing package in order for them to bid properly, they couldn't give us an estimate. However, they did give us a historical cost from a previous project that was somewhat similar, and you'd be looking in the range of $2, maybe $3 million for portables to be rented over 18 months, possibly 2 years. And I'll note as well, and I know this was a point that Jeff Shedd had mentioned the last time we had met and previously. Each one of these options, we've accounted for a certain amount of dollars and funds to be put towards high school renovations as well. Those clearly, obviously, have not been fleshed out to the detailed level that would be biddable or constructible. But the thought there would be to address basic infrastructure needs to keep the building going for another 15 or so years, to take it to its end of life at the end of the building curve that we've shown you previously. That would be security upgrades, looking at HVAC upgrades, physical access to the facility, and as much of those items as we can. It would be less knocking down walls and making classrooms bigger, but keeping the building running at a very efficient rate, so that you're not spending a lot a significant amount of money on heat and energy. And also looking at things like we had discussed earlier with the swapping out the tile for maybe a polished concrete or a different kind of flooring, just to eliminate some of those annual maintenance costs that can be pretty burdensome. I apologize if that went on a little tangent a little bit, but I hope that was able to describe each of the options.
No, I appreciate that, James. And I appreciate you bringing up the high school, because we definitely, it doesn't sound like it's the focus in these options, but we definitely don't want it to be lost in the conversation, because
And
the
it-
high school needs attention as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I was going to jump in
Mhm.
right before James started talking about it, that we need to make sure that not only is that highlighted in any plan that we choose, but that we memorialize the fact that this is not like we're going to throw $5 million at the high school and it's going to get us 30 years. No, we're going to do some much needed renovations to get us another 15 years or so.
Absolutely. And again, to your points, at the time when we're putting this together, the focus was the major deficiencies that are very critical at the lower and middle school. And obviously the high school would not be left out. We would certainly want to make sure that whatever needs that need to be addressed there would be addressed. And that would be in any package or any design and plan going forward.
Mhm. Great. So we've reviewed the three options. We've had our conversations about some of the questions that were brought up and asked to be presented a little bit more. I think it's wise to maybe have some conversations about the three options, and we were able to sort of knock number 4 off the list last meeting. I'm wondering if maybe we can look at option 3, the idea of restoration versus renovation, and see if that's a conversation. Elizabeth, you just tilted your head.
I think we're looking at renovation versus brand new buildings, not restoration.
You're right. Sorry, I misread that. Thank you. Versus new buildings, and see if there's an appetite for either or neither, or whichever way we want to go. So I want to open the conversation a little bit more and see if we can sort of narrow down our focus as a group of where we want to move forward. And so I'm going to open. Yeah, go ahead, Callum.
There we go. Hey, would Heather, I can give you my cell or a number and we can drop off so you can have this conversation. Then if you'd like us to jump right back in, you can just text me and say, hey, we have some questions. Would that make it?
Sure.
Would that make it easier?
I think so.
Okay.
DJ, go ahead.
Before you guys jump off, one of the questions that we brought up last time was sort of a total cost. Understanding that a new building will have a different set of operating costs over the next 30 years, as we talk about term, and a more efficient operating cost, less maintenance, obviously, with new versus old, and understanding how that if that change from the full renovation, a gut renovation of the current buildings, if just even if you can't get dollars and cents nailed down on a scale, is it much more efficient for a new structure versus a full renovation with as much energy efficiency as we can do, or is that number so small that it's not really worth a variable in this conversation at all?
It's an excellent question. I'll be brief in my answer, which is that for a true frame off restoration, like we were put in the and we spoke of it, you basically, the school you're going to look at will have hopefully similar materials and similar R values for the building, but not necessarily the foundation of the slab. So for the energy costs for the options 1 and 2 will be very efficient, extremely as good as you can possibly get. For the frame off restoration, they're going to be a little bit higher. Next is the O&M piece that you asked about, Richard, and so again, with all 3 options, if we all have similar flooring, similar walls, similar thing, you would expect that the O&M piece would be a function of the square footage, and it would largely be the same. And then the third piece of your question, which is what is it compared to right now? Perry, I don't know if Perry's still on, oh, there he is, has shown us, that every year his emergent needs go up because, circuit boards fry and things going on. And so he has a budget that's going up. And I would expect that usually in a brand spanking new building of the type that we're talking about here, your O&M costs are going to be very constant for about the first period, 8 to 10 years, and then they'll start that slow decline as the building begins to age and you have to fix more and more things. Whereas right now they're tracking up at a fairly alarming rate. So I would overall in dollars per square foot, that picture is going to improve.
I guess I should say before I give you permission to leave, let's see if there's other questions for you. Marianne, your hand is up. Do you have a question again? If so, unmute.
Thanks, Heather. I need the
Yeah.
reminder.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just have a question. I'm trying to understand in terms of the compensation to the architects. Do you make the same amount of money whether we do options 1, 2, or 3? I'm not sure how that works.
No, it's traditionally, Marianne, especially at this point, the fee will be a percentage of whatever you spend. Whether you hire us or any other architect and engineer, it's generally going to be based on a percentage of the construction. And for usually at about $30 million, the percentage of an A&E fee tends to drop off because you're designing things of such scale that the fee doesn't track up. So if you have a $100 million project, doesn't have the same percentage as a $40 or $50 million. For a school type architect, if you look around, you're probably going to find between 12 and 16%. We showed our fees at roughly 12%, and then plus the study. So it's fee based.
So it's based. So is it basically then about, it's some percentage of 93 million on option 1 or approximately 60 million? I'm using the most recent inflation. So it's a percentage of 60 million or a percentage of 90 million?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And if I can add on to that, that's once those numbers are actually determined. Once the schematic design is performed and you can determine what the actual size and scope of the building is going to be, a proper cost estimate at that point, because you would actually have physical walls that you can have a takeoff for those. And one also note, as part of the State of Maine Bureau of Real Estate Management system, they have a certain percentage that basically limits the amount that any architectural engineering firm can charge municipality for any large capital project. So that percentage is set, and it's used the same for whether it's our firm or another firm. It would be the same percentage, and that's
Heather,
regulated by the state.
Heather, if I could just give you my cell, I wanted to get us to get off to give you privacy to talk amongst yourselves. I'll be sitting here right in front of my screen, and if you just text me and say, Caitlin, we have some questions, or text James, we're happy to jump right back on. I just wanted to give you the privacy of your committee.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate that. Let me just see if Kimberly Carr has a question specifically for you, because her hand has been raised for a moment, and then let's do that. Kimberly, I appreciate that thoughtfulness.
Thank you so much. And I did have a question for you, and it may be one that you don't have an answer for, but clearly, there's not an exact replica of our building out there somewhere, but I don't know if you, in looking at this, had come up with any similar buildings that might have some energy saving percentage that we could look at, a building that was renovated and how their energy expenditures changed with a new building or a renovated building or anything like that, but something that might be similar in size to our building.
Yes, as I recall, I think, James, help me out here, either November, December or January, we actually found some O&M costs for various schools and showed how they dropped because you went to a new school where you're not having to clean linoleum to the extent, Perry, I think it's 1.2 million a year you're spending on your linoleum. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And some other stuff. So yes, we have that data. I don't have it right at my fingertips, and I apologize. Let us jump off, give you folks your privacy, and we'll be looking that up. And if you don't need us, fantastic, but we will be here the whole time waiting for a text.
What I'll do is
Heather-
I'll send an email to Heather and Marcy and Donna of our cell
Okay,
phones if
perfect.
it needs to
Okay.
dial back in.
That's great.
And yeah,
Thank you both.
I think it was a previous presentation that did have the dollars per square foot spent from a maintenance standpoint, like at Scarborough High School and in other schools as well. It's the dollars per square foot for your average maintenance cost is what you're going to be looking at. But I guess if that answers your question, if there is anything else, we'll back away.
All right. Thanks so much.
Kaylin and Jane.
Okay. So moving forward, it's just us. Are there any other questions or comments, observations, inputs that people would like to share? And I'm seeing Marianne and Kimberly's hands. I'm thinking they're up from before.
Can I ask a clarification question?
You
And
sure can, Nasser.
hopefully someone here could answer it and doesn't have to be Kaylin. So for the renovation, are we considering all buildings renovation or part of the building's renovation? I know one of the building is quite old, like 39 or 35 years old. So do we still consider that as being renovated as well?
So my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, people's other understanding was that the idea of renovation was that the buildings would be renovated. And within that, of course, will come some new construction. But for the most part, it's considered a renovation.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if that really explained it, but.
Yeah, so age doesn't matter. So even if it's 100 years old, we still have to do the renovation option under that.
I believe so.
We do get the option of anything that's old. Okay. So which leads me, can there be a combo? So we need to ask the question about. So right now you're asking yes or no question and nothing in the middle for now. I guess it's out open for the floor. Let people make a decision.
So my understanding, Nasser, is that the options that were presented to us involve down to the stud and current slab renovation of Pond Cove and the middle school, and then some money set aside to renovate the high school is one option. And then there are two other options that involve complete brand new buildings for the elementary school and the middle school based on the findings of the study. And then also in those options involve some money set aside for renovation at the high school, with the understanding that the high school is likely going to need a new school as well later. But to your point, like you're talking about the middle school being so incredibly old, and yeah, so those, I think that's been taken into account.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
I thought that what Marianne sent was actually quite helpful, and it gave some, it made me think a little bit around renovation versus new stuff. And The fact is that the internet is loaded with articles about buildings that have been renovated instead of new stuff being put up. But I can't get past the fact that we're talking about a long, sprawling building. If you go on the internet, you'll see 3 and 4 story old school buildings that lend themselves to probably, we've learned a lot, I think, in this process about long runs. And I know Derek is with us here today, and he's in the business, long runs and, heating inefficiencies. And I can't get past the fact that this building, the way it is right now, is not going to be suitable from a heating and HVAC standpoint. The other thing is, if you go back to the report, which was, prepared by these folks back in October, and it's right there, October of 19, there's some big dollar items in there that still have to be dealt with. I mean, you're talking about a cafeteria and a new kitchen that, they have a $4.8 million number there, and they're trying to get creative about where they're going to put it. They've got a 1.8 million, a 1.9 million security piece where they are proposing having to put an addition up front to manage the doors, the entry doors. And it just, to me, I think Reno in this case just doesn't work for all those reasons, as well as the long-term costs of running it.
Thank you, Andy.
I'd add to
Valerie.
that looking at these numbers, that basically is 60 million versus 80 million. Is 20 million in savings worth all those inefficiencies that will continue on because of the layout.
Okay. Thank you, Nicole. Valerie, you are hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I agree with you. I think that especially the middle school, when we did the building, the first needs assessment, we did the tours of the building, we saw that the middle school really, really needs work, and a lot of it appears to be a tear down. My question, though, is that with enrollment declining, have we, and I know they put together these options based on enrollment the way it is today. But if enrollment does continue to decline and we don't have any new cross-field developments coming our way, so really it looks like it's going to continue to decline. What about an option where we create one new building instead of 2 new buildings? And maybe it's 3 or 4 stories, but something to where maybe it doesn't cost as much, but it's more of a K through 8, or it's something to where in the next few years, as we start downsizing with our incoming classes, it will work and fit for us. Is that just something that can't work at all? I'm just curious why we only had these 4 options and we didn't talk about maybe 1 new building.
Is there anyone on here who can speak to that, the forecasting numbers a little more clearly than that? I mean, I've heard and seen a couple different things in this regard, and I'm not sure I have my head wrapped around the fact that numbers are going to continue to decrease, at least to a significant degree. Maybe we'll see it, but whether or not that's significant is another question. Valerie, I agree with what you're saying. It's important to factor in, but I think about the long-term planning that we're doing around the high school that needs so much work, and we've already pushed it out X number of years. I'm really uncomfortable with even option 3, given that, and then to even reduce it down to 1 building. I know that we've looked at some of the real estate numbers and there were differing opinions, but I'm not sure I buy into that right now. I think especially with what's going on right now, there's a lot of interest in areas like ours. And I don't think we have that data yet. I don't even think it's available yet.
And is there any plans? I know it seems to be a growing trend in terms of adding pre-K to our schools. And if we're doing that, that's another thing to factor into our numbers.
I believe that Dell said, if he's still here, that it became part of the conversation again. Yes, Jen, it has come in and out in conversations with the state that we may at some point be asked to be responsible for pre-K students, and that might be headed. I saw Cindy had her hand raised, and I'm going to get to you in 1 second. I just would like to remind everybody as well of that long chart that is a favorite of some of us on the board, and Donna has showed it about enrollment. When you look at enrollment, you really have to be able to see a picture that is beyond a number of students that are coming, because we continue to be asked, yeah, there goes Donna with the chart. We continue to be asked, and if you've never seen this chart, somehow you have to see it. It is fascinating of the requirements that are being asked for us. And it's not, we need a building for 20 students. It's, we need a building that's very specific for one student and one student. And we are ethically, we want to, but also statewide, we are mandated to provide these services. And so I would beg to also offer that even if numbers are going down, like this space is needed. And you know, board members and administrators, you know, if you agree with that, I would love a second on that. But that is, you know, when we look at the piece of enrollment, it is so much more than just a number that is declining, and maybe not even significantly, as Terry had mentioned.
I just want to piggyback on what you're saying, but I don't want to leave Cindy behind. So
yeah. Cindy, are you talking enrollment, or do you have another question?
I was going to talk both, actually.
Okay.
One, enrollment for one. Also, you know, we want to remember we're not just looking at 5 years or 10 years. We're looking at school buildings now that are 50 years and 60 years old. So we want to not just accommodate what we have now, but we want to think into the future, and as much as possible. And I think using, you know, leveraging the architects with experience in designing school spaces of the future, I think we really want to look forward into creating spaces going forward and not pull in our spaces. And I think it is, as Terry said, I think the trend now is there are people moving into, I think people are leaving cities, moving into more rural and remote areas with more flexibility in commuting and remote working. And I think that'll continue to happen. And I think we will continue to see, you know, our population go up as much as our town develops. But we have to build for, not for now, we have to build for 50 years into the future. And I think that's how we should be thinking about this. A separate comment I had about the option 3 and the renovations is, to me, another big wild card in that cost is not, I mean, there's the cost of renting portables, but if you're putting portables out there, we also have to wire those portables for internet. We have to heat those portables. We have to provide the whole infrastructure to support those portables, and not to mention the disruption to the students. So, and to me, that's a really large expense, and probably beyond what, you know, they're even estimating for the cost of renting the portables. So I don't think the renovation would be any less expensive, significantly less expensive in the long run. And especially when you factor in the heating cost, I think you'd be lucky to break even with the renovation, given all the other expense. And I believe they said in a prior meeting that expenses for the portables and whatever infrastructure we would need to put in place to support the portables can't come out of bond funding. So that's a big chunk that would have to be financed in another way.
I want to get to Elizabeth. I have a question for you, Cindy. I know that you work in technology, and do you consider yourself an expert in the realm of the cost of technology, or not so much in that realm?
That's not something I really be able to estimate.
Okay.
But I'm sure if we, talk to our
We could look into it in more
technology
detail.
crew,
Yeah.
what it would take to make sure those, classrooms all have access.
Great. There's a lot of people with hands up, so I want to just give a little queuing order here. I saw Elizabeth, and then I saw Hope, and then Valerie again, and Kimberly, and then Nasser. So we'll see how we go there. All right. So Elizabeth.
I'll try not to have adventurous internet anymore, but I appreciate. I think we need to move on. Enrollment. We had a study, and we presented the study, and in the study, our enrollment looked fairly flat. And again, I appreciate that everybody is continually being made aware that it's not as simple as taking 20 students and putting them in a box, because that's certainly not how education works anymore, and didn't work when I went to school either, but maybe it worked that way when some people went to school, which is we have these needs. We have speech pathologists, we have psychologists, we have occupational and physical therapists, and all these people need spaces. So really these buildings are about spaces and not just classrooms. So I think that, as people who are really talking about the number one goal for, in my opinion, I'm going to put myself right out there, is, we need to replace these buildings. And number one goal is health and safety. Number two is, education. How can we absolutely meet the needs of our students in the best way? And number three is, an environmental / cost impact. And so for a myriad of reasons, we shouldn't consider renovation. We're not going to get a new slab. We're not going to get new, run of the building. So we're going to have, bad heating costs, bad HVAC costs, and perhaps who knows what's coming up from the ground under those buildings. And we have the same shape to work with for the spaces that already don't work. And then the educational cost and the actual cost of portables, and where to put the portables, and where it's kind of crazy. So my opinion is renovation is throwing bad money, and it's throwing good money after bad. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Hope.
Hi, thank you. So I think Cindy and Elizabeth both sort of covered what I was going to mention, and that is sort of repeat what I said at the last meeting, which is to draw us back, bring our focus back to the charge of the committee, which is review the presentations that we've been given, look at the options that we've been given. We had the population survey, we have the enrollment survey, we have that information. Our job is not to precisely predict how many students we're going to have in 10 or 15 years. And in fact, I don't think it really matters. I don't think it should impact our decision, because fluctuation up or down a certain percentage shouldn't impact a decision this big about what we're doing going forward. So anyway, to bring us back to the focus, which is we've all been at these meetings. I think we can respect everyone's time better if we make the assumption that we've all been paying attention to the presentations. We know what the options are. We all have an understanding of the costs. We have an understanding of the bearing on the town's bond rating. And I think time is of the essence here. I think that we've spent a lot of time on this, and that our next step should be putting the options on the table and making a decision. And my feeling is similar to Elizabeth. I think renovation, I would take that off the table. I think we've waited so long, we're so far overdue, that at this point that would just be spending good money after bad. So that's my opinion, and I hope that I'm hoping that I think we all should be ready to make decisions and sort of move forward with the committee at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Hope. Kimberly, and then Nasser.
Yeah, I was had just looked earlier today, and in a handout that we were given in the March 4th meeting, it looks as though the cost of the portables are not included in the estimated bond size. So the 53 to 58 million, it looks like does not include the cost of the rentals, and it does not include the utilities for that. So for me, you know, so then we're looking at possibly, I have no idea what utilities would be, but 56 to 63, the renovation to me just doesn't make sense. Financially, it doesn't make sense. From an environmental and an energy efficiency perspective, I don't think it makes sense. From what's doing the best for our students academically and from a health and safety perspective, I don't think putting them in portables for 18 months to renovate a building that is serving us poorly right now makes sense.
Okay. Now, sir.
All right, so I don't know why I turned my video off. There it is. I got 2 points in reference to renovation versus new construction. I think I may be wrong about these numbers. The numbers that keep changing. Someone said renovation in between new construction is like $20 million difference. And someone also said, I think Elizabeth, that renovation may give us 15 years and new construction may give us 50 years. So we gotta look at that compound effect too. If we do a renovation, give us 50 more years, in 50 more years, are we be able to build something for the $20 million that will last another 25 years or not? So that's we gotta look at those numbers. We gotta look at those compound effects as well. So that's my point on that. The next point is a little crazy, so you guys have to pay attention to it because you gotta think of out of the box. The portable aspect is quite costly in my opinion, and as Cindy said, it's going to be even more costly because of infrastructure. So what if we look at something outside of the town, and I don't think there's anything nearby South Portland, but I'm thinking it's all Orchard Beach. I'm thinking they have hotels that do not run in the winter. Hotels are warm, they have bathrooms, they have heat, they have Wi-Fi, they have all that sort of aspect, and they would love to, quote unquote, donate and put their name on the paper and so forth, and actually will get some money in return as well. Can we think of something like that, or is it a lot of liability issue and we have to talk to a lawyer about that one? That's it.
Oh, Tim, sorry. I was looking on the side for the hands. Thank you for speaking up.
I
Go
was
ahead,
looking on
Tim.
the screen here how with the computer show.
Go ahead.
A couple of things I want to try to just cover tonight. I think the population, as I'm trying to think of how do we go to the community and get the community's support for this project, like we've done in the past for the library and some of the other building construction programs we've done over the last 30 years. I do think we need to try to get some kind of a feel from the community of what the community would support. Would they support 25, 50, or now we're talking 75 to 80 million? I've been involved in this long enough to know the reaction we got when the school board came to the town and said, we need to do this renovation. That's going to be 20 to 25 million. And the town's reaction was pretty strongly pushing it back to the point where we then had to go out and do this study that we had Colby do for us. The 20 to 25 million, we got a lot of pushback on. 50 million or an 80 to 90 million dollar project, I'd like to get a sense or a feel from the community of where their feeling on that is. I think the information that Matt shared tonight was very helpful, but it's looking at the cost somewhere around a 12% increase for a medium priced house. If we're going to be looking at something in excess of 12%, which these projects, when you listen to the increased cost of steel and concrete. You know, in some of those cases, the examples they gave, the increase was significant over their recommendations. I do think we need to try to get some kind of a feel from the community. I do think we need to also get some feel for how the town feels about the population. I do think we can get information from the realtors in town to see where, when a new house becomes available, how many young families are moving into town to get that. Because from my work on the comprehensive plan, what we saw was when a house came on the market, the house was there was a ton of competition for that house, and the young family moving to Cape Elizabeth was rarely winning out in that fight to get that new house. It was a lot of times it was, Cape's has a great reputation of being well run, and the mill rate that we pay is very, very efficient. You know, all the beautiful things that people want to move to Cape Elizabeth for, they're just as likely to want to come here in retirement as they are to move a young family into town. So I think the population piece is something we have to continue to look at. I think the projection that we went out and spent money on to get projected this year, we were going to have 1,575 students. I think the actual number, I mean, we know now what we actually have, and I think it's 1,500. So even from the projection that we got of 1,575, I think it's down to 1,500. Obviously, Donna, you could correct me on that, but that's the number that I'd understood we actually have now. So I think we do have to pay attention to that. I do think in our last session we also had a lot of, based on COVID, we now have a lot of need for smaller spaces. So we haven't even, I don't think the architects even taken into consideration what the plan design ought to look like in a world moving forward where we might need smaller spaces for a lot of our specialists. But I do think that's another piece that needs to be taken into account. But when you look at the last large project the town had was the town library. And when they first came to the town with a presentation, it was an $8 million project. And the town did not support it. They pushed back on it completely. They went back and redesigned the town library, and it came back with a $4 million project. And that was overwhelmingly successfully supported. So the right price for this, so we can go out and help sell this to the community, we've got to make sure that we're taking into consideration that in a 20 million, if we're going to go renovations over completely knocking all these down, some of the buildings I don't think we can knock down. The oldest building in the town, the one that goes way back, like a century, I think it's got some historical protection, unfortunately. And then the last piece, and I don't mean to go on so long, but the high school, that's a 1969 building. And I hate to see that one kind of get shuffled to the end of the bus. When I look at the middle school, much of the middle school is probably the newest of the three. Ponco has got some newer pieces to it than the high school. And so I also have some concerns about the high school kind of getting, maybe not, yes, we can redo their floors. That makes the floors, I mean, everybody agreed right off the bat that we had to redo every floor because that's costing us over $1 million a year to just polish them. But those are just some of my thoughts. I'm a little concerned that the public, through articles in the Courier and whatnot, haven't really, I mean, we're all interested in this. We're all involved in this, but I'm not sure too much of Cape Elizabeth really understands the depth of what we're looking at and the kind of tax impact. Matt was very helpful with all his information this morning, but if we're looking at a 12 to 15% increase in everybody's property taxes, I think we need to begin getting that information out a little bit more broadly to the public. So thanks, and sorry for being so long-winded.
Mary Ann and then Jamie Garvin.
Thank you, Heather. So I had a couple of thoughts. I don't know that I'm prepared to vote on any option tonight. I don't think we've had an unbiased evaluation of renovation versus new construction. The architects would make about 10.8 million, I guess, using the 12% that they mentioned tonight on a new construction project of $90 million. They make 7.2 million on a $60 million renovation. So that's a 50%, almost a 50% increase in their fee, going from the least expensive option to the most expensive option. And I really do think we need to have a firm that is expert in renovation and sustainable renovation take a look and advise us on that issue. The second thing is, I think the demographics really strain credulity. We have dropped from about 1,860 or so students to, I think, 1,500 today. And I don't see it even stabilizing based on just anecdotal information of the sales that I'm aware of. The older people in town, such as myself, don't have a place to move to. We don't have a stock of housing. So I see people like myself and others renovating to stay in place. And we're not selling our homes to younger families, even though we'd like to find other places in town. So I don't think we've done enough on the demographic number. Third, I thought Valerie made an excellent point. If we're at 1,500 students and we could be down to 12 or 1,300 in a few years, shouldn't we be looking at one K-8 building? And then lastly, on the first option, $90 million, we're looking at over a 25% tax increase. And that's just on the debt alone. That doesn't include the operating increases that we see every year to fund teacher contracts and the operating increases that the town comes in at every year. As Tim mentioned, it was hard to sell a library project that was a new building, $8 million to this town. And we ended up renovating what we had because we couldn't sell an $8 million library. So I think we need to get more information before we can go and successfully sell a project to the voters.
Go ahead, Jamie.
I just wanted to specifically follow up on Tim's point around sort of public engagement, public input, gauging public opinion, and so on. I think that that's important, but I also think that there are a number of natural points in the process going forward, at which point all of that would be, there'd be further opportunity to have exactly that. So, obviously this committee's charge is to make a recommendation to the school board. We shouldn't be recommending anything that we aren't comfortable with them actually deciding to move forward with. But even if they decide to move forward with that, there's a public, public input process where folks will have that opportunity to come forward. Certainly they've had the opportunity as part of our own meeting proceedings and everything like that. But I think that's really the time at which point we would see more of that input from community members and citizens to say, I'm either for or against this. The other aspect of that too is, ultimately, from a sequencing perspective as well, there's just the natural calendar of the budget season that will be coming into soon as well. So, that's a further opportunity for people to weigh in more broadly on just overall tax impact, tax burden, things of that sort. So anyway, that's just my perspective on the public input and public engagement part of this process. I don't think we should be the ones at this stage holding up any decision we're looking to render based on the facts we have before us, in order to further facilitate that feedback. I think it'll come at the point where the school board's actually looking to move forward or make a decision on whatever the recommendation is, and folks will have a chance to weigh in then.
Thank you, Jamie. Derek.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand the process a little bit, in terms of what the next steps are in terms of you're committing to an idea. So you're saying, okay, our idea is we think we need 2 buildings. I'm just throwing this out there. We think we need 2 buildings. Let's hire an architect to take it to a certain level of design. But during that process, you're going to look at programming. You're going to look at population studies. You're going to have a building committee that basically kind of says, let's include this, let's not include that, do that. Then you come up with a schematic design, and then I assume you'll get a professional estimating company to estimate it, and that's what you would base your bond on. Is that the correct process?
My belief is yes. Yes, that's my understanding.
So at this point, it would be more a commitment to a design team, or you could go out to multiple design teams and say, here's our idea. We want to have either 1 or 2 buildings. We're not sure. We want you to take it to a schematic level of design, which commits, say, it's $200,000 or $300,000 in design fees. At that point, you actually weigh in a lot of that stuff you're asking about: population, programming. Maybe the buildings need to be smaller. At which point, then you could say, great, we have a schematic design. We'll take that to an estimating firm, have them estimate it, or we take it to a couple of GCs to estimate it. Say we think it's roughly here, and that's the number you might go to bond with. So that's one thing. So I think there's still a process. It's not like committing to 90 million today and going, we're not going to even include population studies, and we're just going to build 250,000 square feet of building because that's what we're doing. I think there's still a long process involved. I just wanted to touch base on the architectural fees, because I think Kaylin was wrong on that. There's actually, if you look at the main BGS, Bureau of General Services, that's the one who handles all the state construction, school construction. And they actually have a document, and for projects over $50 million, the architectural rates are 5 to 7%. But yes, they are tiered in such a way, but so it's not 12% on 90 million. Those percentages do go down as those numbers go up. So then these can all be negotiated too. These are not strict, you must pay us 12%. And that's part of an RFP process you could go through with multiple architects. So that's all I had. I think everybody knows how I feel about the renovation project. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Derek. Jen, I see your hand raised.
Hi. My thoughts are, and I don't know the exact year, so you'll have to, don't hold me to this, but isn't the oldest school is middle school, right? And then at some point, they decided to make an elementary school. Like, haven't there already been like many renovations on these schools? Like,
yes,
garden wing and so
wings have been added, renovations have been done, and that's what makes that sort of makeshift, ongoing maze type situation.
Yeah, and like I'm looking at the floor plan of Pond Cove and the middle school, and so to me, like, it doesn't. I feel like that we've renovated as many times as we could to give us the life of these schools. So, in my opinion, where they're at right now, it doesn't make sense to renovate. I think we can make more energy efficient schools with new construction. That's just one of my thoughts. And then just the one school building versus 2. If I look at the document that the February 4th meeting where they laid out all their plans, that the end document for option 1 or option 2, I mean, really is one Pond Cove and middle school, similar to how it is now. It's one building. So we would as Derek said, we would hire a firm, do more studies to figure out the size of the building. And I guess we can decide if we want a separate middle school and a separate elementary school, but to me, that shouldn't really affect the decisions we're making, whether we renovate or option one, option two. They kind of give you the same result in the end. It's just whether you want to do it over a longer period of years. So
right.
Those are just a few of my thoughts. And I feel like we should make a decision sooner rather than later. When I came on the board for the first meeting, it's already been like a year. My daughter is in 2nd grade, would love to try and get her into a type of new school building. So yeah.
I'm just wondering, I don't see anybody else's hands raised, but I just want to go back to what Hope mentioned a little while ago, is just to remind us of our charge, right? Our job is not to have this 100% figured out. Our job is not to sort of know what the public wants. And so that will come in the process as we make a recommendation to the board, and then it gets teased out later. So I'm wondering, Donna, could you take a moment? You have the charge in front of you still. Would you be able to read that one more time to us, just to make it really clear so we don't get caught too far in the weeds? We have had plenty of expert opinions, and I'm feeling the call to narrow this down and move forward a little bit with a recommendation, and it's not a commitment to any one thing specifically. Go ahead.
So the charge is to review the needs assessment report, determine priorities, determine the size and scope of a future building project and bond, and then make a recommendation to the school board.
Mm-hmm. And I would also like to, it's been brought up a few times, the comparison to the library. And I would just like to say this, I don't think any of us know the appetite for taking on debt and an increase in property tax for the improvement of our schools. I think it is a very different ask than for a library. You've got a lot of people in this town, and they have kids that they want to be in a building where they can optimally learn. And they have kids that have been through a tough year and don't want to put them through renovations in portables and more disruption. This is my opinion. I don't know if this is true. This is my opinion. And so that's why I am going to make the recommendation that I don't want a renovation. I want to go for one of the options of a new building, and then I want to see what the appetite is for the town to have. As far as population, some people might be renovating their homes as they get older because they have no other place to live. My parents just moved out of their home in Cape Elizabeth, and a young family moved into it. So there's both sides to every story. I think we just need to vote and decide and start moving forward with this. It's 8:15. We have been working on this for over a year. We've asked experts to come back. I want to speak to a moment about the architects, and that I have had a relationship with them for over 2 years. Before Donna was here, when the previous superintendent interim, Howard Coulter, I know Kimberly Carr was a part of these conversations as well. We met them initially. Kalen lives here in Cape Elizabeth. He will be paying these taxes as well. He, again, my opinion, he cares about this community. I don't think he's out, of course he's out to make some money, it's his job. I don't think he's out to gouge us. I don't think he's out to ask for us to do a full renovation because it's going to benefit him financially. I believe the man has integrity. He is one of the kindest people I've ever met. I've seen him outside of the district on a walk. He is one of the nicest people I've met, and I believe his heart is in the right place, and I believe he has integrity. And so I do not question their expertise at all. Derek's opinion as a professional about renovation, I value tremendously that we have an existing structure that does not align easily to renovation, is my understanding of what I'm hearing. If we had a nice square building like Mahoney Middle School that was maybe 3 or 4 stories tall, and we had a foundation and walls that once we renovated the inside, it would be a structure that would be maintained well, that would be a whole different story. But that, as Jen just mentioned, is not what we have. We've already done the renovations. So I see that Phil has raised his hand, but after that, I would like to make the recommendation so that we can respect people's time to go ahead with a vote about moving forward to the next step of taking renovation off the table as part of the conversation. But Phil, I want to give you an opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thank you. I just a couple of points, Heather, and I appreciate what you just said. You know, the way I've looked at this in my membership on this committee is that we're stewards of the community and stewards of the buildings and our students. And so to me, it's important. Yeah, am I disappointed that we have to pay for this ourselves? Yes. Right. We've seen a lot of communities around us that have gotten state funding for their buildings, including nearby. But it is where we are. And what I'm hearing from the experts that we've looked to is that these 2 buildings need to be replaced. South Portland just went through this conversation with their middle schools about whether it was two renovations versus 1 new building. And, you know, the state weighed in on that and gave more state funding if they had a new building, because it was going to make more sense environmentally to build a new building and not renovate. So I also just want to say a word, because we've heard a lot about experts. We've had a lot of experts. We have people questioning experts. We want more experts. As a town, we've hired you know, people to give us their opinion. I've trusted their opinion. We've gone back a couple times on the population. I think we're always going to have questions about that. At a certain point, we need to take what has been given us and weigh it. But we could keep on asking for another opinion for another 2 or 3 years. And I agree with Jen. It's time to move on this. And you know, I'm of the opinion that I think we need to have 2 new buildings. I don't think the renovation is a good idea. Now, how do we pay for it? That conversation is going to have to continue. I'm not going to say here tonight that I know how that's going to work and how we're going to sell it and how we're going to phase it. But if we're just looking at ourselves as stewards of the buildings and what we need to do, that's where I am at this point. It doesn't make sense to keep throwing, you know, good money after bad. Sorry. So that's where I am. Thanks.
Okay. I think I'd like to put on the table a vote to, the other reason is what I am hearing, the majority of what it feels like I am hearing is a desire to take the option of renovation off the table. I feel like I've heard an overwhelming support for that. Is Elizabeth here still? Yes, Elizabeth, I might need your technical support because I forget how to do this. The vote piece. Does everybody just have the opportunity in a panelist? I don't know if Matt knows this. I'm sorry, this doesn't seem very professional, but is there a way to vote that I'm not aware of? I'm looking and I don't see it.
I saw it in a different meeting and I'm not seeing it on my screen right now.
Okay.
I do not believe you have the option on the, at least on this, as far as like, there's sometimes if you have a Zoom meeting, you can do a poll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That way, but since this is a webinar, that doesn't exist as an option. So the
Maybe
other
we
way
just
you
have
can do the
panelists
manual roll
raise
call
hands
call.
or something, or
Yep.
to
So then
take
what I want to
option
do
3
is,
off the table.
yep, what I need to do is make sure everybody knows how to raise their hand electronically. So to raise your hand electronically, I don't know if I can explain it as a host.
So
as a non-host.
click on for us, we click on participants. And that
Yep.
shows the panelists versus the attendees.
Right.
Because only the panelists should be voting. And of course,
Yep. And how does a panelist vote?
I would think you go down to the bottom of that bar that says participants and click on raise hand. Does everybody
Okay,
see?
so I don't have a raised hand because I'm a host. So there is a raised hand button at the bottom there for all of you?
Yes.
Okay.
Or
I
if
just
you're
want to,
if you're on an iPad or another device, there'll probably be on the far right-hand corner, 3 dots and more.
Yeah.
And if you tap on that, there's a raise hand option there too. So.
okay.
Also,
So-
Heather, if it makes it
Yes.
easier, you can, I know it's 30 participants, you can see them on the screen and you can call them off individually and they may say yay
That's
or
true.
nay.
You could do a roll call.
Roll call.
All right. Maybe I'll do that. So bear with me for a moment. I think that's the best way to do it. So just to be clear, I am voting to take renovation off the table
That's option 3.
as an option. Yes, option 3.
Yeah, I might clarify and call it option 3 since
Okay,
we
option 3.
will keep renovation for the high school in
Yes,
both of those.
okay, off the table. So a yay means option 3 goes. Okay. So just trying to make sure I have this. And if Donna or Elizabeth is able to back me up a little bit so that I can make sure my count's okay, I think it's okay. So to take option 3 off the table, Heather Altenberg is a yay. I see Marcy. Andy Patton.
Yay.
Okay. Stephen Price will not vote because he's a teacher. Sorry, Stephen. Phil.
Yay.
Okay. Terry Patterson.
Yay.
Jen, and I don't know how to say it, Grymek.
Remick, yay.
Nicole.
Sorry, I'm used to so many Nicoles. Yay.
Yay. Okay. Perry's not going to vote. Matt's not going to vote. Valerie.
Yay.
Jeff won't vote. Carla Bryan.
Yay.
Marianne Lynch.
No.
Hope Straw.
Yay.
Cindy Volts.
Yay.
Jamie Garvin.
Yes.
Jen McVeigh.
Yay.
Nasser Shear.
Yay.
Richard. TJ Nelson.
Yay.
Kimberly Carr.
Yay.
Tim Thompson.
No.
Elizabeth Seyfries.
Yay.
Derek Converse.
Yay.
Okay. I have to move my screen. I've run out of people here. Erin Taylor.
Yay.
She's not voting, right?
She's a teacher, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Erin, I can't have you vote.
I'm a
Sorry.
taxpayer too.
I know. Del Peavy is I can't vote either. Jason, Sonia, Susanna may or may not be here anymore. She texted me saying she might have to pop out, so she's not going to vote. Okay, so in that case, I think we will take option 3 off the table, and we will follow through with another meeting to discuss option 1 and 2, hopefully to come out with a more narrowed recommendation for the board. Are there any final questions or comments before we all disperse?
Heather, is there any more information that people need for that meeting?
Tim Thompson just raised his hand. So Tim, do you have information?
No, I don't have information. I was just a clarification on one of the points you made earlier, Heather. Are you suggesting that we would move forward with Colby without, I'm not sure that these jobs could even go out without some kind of a bid process. So
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting that.
okay, because we'd have to get, I would think, more architectural firms involved just to.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What I was mentioning is that it seemed like it was suggested that they were self-serving in their information towards us about the recommendations. And I was saying that I think that they're outstanding people and that they, I think, are really hoping to support us as best they can. But yes, it would definitely have to go out to bid, Tim.
Thank you.
Yeah. I see Jeff's hand raised and then Marianne can speak.
I just have a question that I'm confused by. So in anticipation of a next meeting, I don't need an answer right now. Don't expect one.
Okay.
I'm a little bit confused about this about option 1. As I understand it, it envisions we build a new building which is intended to be for the long-term use of the middle school, but it will be occupied for 10 years by elementary school students until a new customized elementary school is built. So I'm just confused by that, about designing something to be occupied for 10 years by middle school, but it's really going to be a long-term elementary school. I just need some clarification about that.
Okay, we'll definitely ask them. I think the idea was phased versus all at once between the two, but I hear your question in the specific about how to phase with different age groups taking one over for 10 years. So that's something that we can work to clarify for you, Jeff. Thank you.
Heather, I know we're coming toward the ending, and is it worth inviting the consultants or the architects back in or no?
We can. Marcy, would you mind doing that? Since you have the numbers, would you be able to do that? Okay, thanks.
To come in right now?
If you're ending it, maybe not necessary. If we can continue another half an hour, then in my opinion, yes.
Maybe they come back for the next meeting.
Next time.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Yes, they come back to answer these questions. Sorry, I wasn't thinking clearly. Absolutely. I think we're just sort of gathering the information right now that we don't want to get into lengthy discussions at this point, but we can collect some information. Marianne, you had your hand raised, and then Tim, if you have your hand raised.
Thanks, Heather. I just wanted to be clear. I was not attacking anybody's integrity, but I think that the financial incentives are skewed and create the perception of potential bias. It has nothing to do with someone lacking integrity, and it's not a concept that I want anyone to think I am floating, because I'm sure that they all have a great deal of integrity. But I think we would have done better having an analysis from a firm that has no further skin in the game. So I just wanted to be clear that I'm not attacking anybody's integrity. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Tim looks like he put his hand down. Jeff already spoke. Is there any more information that people would like for the next meeting?
So Heather, we have one bullet point, I'm not gonna say one or two, option left right now, and that's new construction. As Mr. Sher said, that it may be one building, it may be two buildings, it may be a time factor. Is that still up for discussion at the next meeting, right? It's not a done deal, right? We can modify the options.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And I think Derek explained it very well, that as we go through the process, it will be tweaked and explored for sure. And the architects have mentioned several times that these are not the only options out there. I think the biggest piece to understand about these two options is the phased concept versus the going in and the plan to sort of do it in a little bit of a faster time frame. Cindy Volz.
I had a question about the phased options in the financing piece. I know we were looking at a faster time frame in the option 2, and then we had 2 phases of bond funding in option 1. Is that was the phasing of the funding the primary reason to do option 1 and spreading out the time frame? And I forgot my next question. I had 2 questions, so that's it. That was probably, oh, I know. And probably a question for Matt. The impact of potentially, I mean, we know we're at, we have very low interest rates right now. So potential impact if we did phase 1 and did not, do another round of bond funding, funding everything up front versus doing part of it now and part, 5 to 10 years down the road, whatever the option was with phase 1. What could, I know we can't predict the interest rates of the future, but it seems like it may end up being more expensive in that regard. So I don't know if Matt would have any input on that.
Matt, is that something that you can prepare a little bit more for next?
Yes, yeah, that's great. No, I think I can expand on what I had crafted earlier as well, and expand that out as you drop debt, as you add debt, and then kind of look at the larger picture over a period of say 5 to 10 years, where you may be, where some may be retired, and at least you can look at that as how that may progress out based on current rates, and then. But I can expand that, so I'm happy to have that for the next meeting. So it'll be a nice project. I'd like to see that grow. So thanks. I'm happy to do it.
That'd be great. Jen McVeigh.
Just one last quick comment, just some initial research. The one thing I still stand steadfast on the pre-K thing, just because I know that it's happening in a lot of other districts around the state, which is going to impact the number of people. But I think there is possibly some merit to a 1 building K-8 just based on some initial research on academic achievement. And I'm wondering if we can just consider that in terms of option 1 because of the phased aspect. And if you're considering only 1 building, that might change how we look at the financial aspect as well.
We can definitely ask the architects to comment on that and give us some input on that.
Yep. Valerie, did I just see your hand raised for a second there?
Well, and it just made me think too that we're talking about the high school, which also needs renovations or a new building. And we're talking about putting some money into it so that in 15 years from now, its life will be finished. So we're looking at a new building also in 15 years from now, from what I'm hearing. I don't know if Matt could put numbers together, because we're looking at a 30-year bond on this project right now, and then in 15 years from now, we're going to add another 30-year bond, it sounds like. I think it's something we need to think about if we're going to talk about 70 million right now, and then in a few years from now, another probably 70 million.
Go ahead, Jamie, and then I want to respect people's time and come to a close.
I'm glad you said that, Valerie. It's the exact point I was going to make, that I think just to make sure that we have a complete picture of the, the potential investments, scope of investments to be made, not only the longer term end of life replacement plan and expense for the high school, but also the intermediate and short term known improvements and upgrades that have been identified, and from those, what may or may not need to be financed versus built into operating budget, and so on. So the total bill due is what the town is going to need to react to and provide their input on. And so, again, to the point that Tim was making earlier about not just setting the high school aside and forgetting about it, but rather being, more inclusive of those known costs now, as well as, I'm sure it's a near impossible task to try and predict what the total cost of replacement would be 15 years from now, but that needs to be accounted for in the full picture here. So.
Thank you for that. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. I wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, Nasser. I wish you a happy 4 days off, maybe some time with family.
Yes.
And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Happy
Bye-bye.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, good meeting.